Hey guys, welcome back. I hope each and every one of you is as amazing as you are and as healthy and as happy as possible. Um, without much further ado, let's get into the agenda that we'll be discussing for today. We prepared a brief slide, so we'll start off with what is a SIM, and I'm pretty sure by the title you guys are already aware that we'll be discussing mostly about Splunk today, which is one of the leading SIM solutions available in market, especially for the security domain. So we'll get started with what is a SIM, and then why do we need a SIM, and then let's jump into a brief introduction about Splunk Enterprise, and then let's deal with the installation process, and then just get add and then we'll add a local data set and then start exploring. So let's get started. So first of all, what is a SIM? So SIM, by the title, by the definition, stands for Security Information and Event Management. So, well, that's great. The definition is great. Like, we could just jump to some conclusions based on the title. So we see two keywords. One is called security information and then event management. From a layman point of view, these two terms are kind of very different. The first one is talking about that there is some relation to the security domain, and the second part, event management, is talking about like all the events and logs, right? So just to sum it up, SIM is anything. Um, is any solution that can analyze log and event data, if we can put it in a more layman way. And obviously, like all computers and everything is all about logs, right? I'm pretty sure all the software engineers out there can definitely relate that. So when you have multiple logs coming in, what else can we do? I'm pretty sure you can do a lot of things, right? You can just comb through or filter through the logs and see all the events you want, and then maybe you can create some rules or maybe see what's actually happening in the system, because logs are the only way the computer talks back to us, uh, to tell us exactly what's going on in the back end, right? So, well, that's for what is a sim, and now let's come into why sim. So now maybe the major question what everybody would ask is why sim. Like, is sim a pretty new concept? Like, do we even have sim back in the old days, like when computers existed? Because back then I'm pretty sure we had logs, at least in my generation. So in my personal view, I would like to call there's definitely a predecessor for everything, right? Like a predecessor for sim, I would like, if I may, there's already things available on your even your Windows. The system that I'm using is actually a Windows 10, and I'm pretty sure in all the Windows you have this. So let's just jump right into the example, right? Like, why do we need a sim? I'm just going to show you a quick example. So just go to your Windows and then type event viewer. I'm pretty sure this is the app that you use to check all the logs on your system, right? Let's try opening this. So you see a multiple tabs here, and then each one is talking about different things. For example, the first one is talking something about custom views, and then Windows logs, application and service logs. So naturally, let's say our whole use case throughout the video is just finding out, as like, basically this is my system, so I naturally want to know who else logged in, right? That's definitely a curiosity of interest. So I'm pretty sure it's going to go to Windows log. So let's open that up, and you see even in Windows log you have multiple types, right? And also at the same time, just take a look at the numbers as well. You see these are the number of events we have. Application, we have security, setup and system. So I'm pretty sure this definitely comes under security. So let's take a look. Now I click on security, and you see it says there's basically 32,019 events. Now in this, how do we exactly find out which log relates to what? So I'm pretty sure people from the security background can relate here. There's actually an event code. So each and all of these logs have something called an event ID or event code, and Microsoft has defined each and every things that they use. And the one that we'll be using for today is called 4624 event ID for Windows. Now let's take a look at what exactly is 4624 and what events does it contain. So this is a quick snippet of what a 4624 event log contains. So it says identifies, okay, this is a highly valuable event since it documents each and every successful attempt, which is exactly what we want, right? If you scroll down, I'm going to leave a link to this amazing website here. It has all the links, by the way, to each and every event code defined by Windows. So if you scroll down all through, you can see an example log, and then these guys give a pretty good definition of what each one is talking about. I'm not gonna spend much time here, but like since we know 4624 is actually the one that's dealing with an account was successfully logged in, that's what we'll be looking for. So if you see, I have close to 32,000 events here, and it's pretty cumbersome to find those events, right? So the way we used to deal with this one is you actually go here, click on security, and then you click on I assume it's filters, yes, and then you go here and then you type event code whatever you want, 4624. You see, it's okay. The response time you see is definitely slower, and I'm using a state of the art system here. I mean, pretty much system everybody would have. Naturally, this comes up. I assume this is in 12 GB RAM DDR4. So it's a pretty new system. But if you see the latency and the one that it's stealing is not actually that great, right? Imagine when you have to deal with multiple computers. Now let's, before jumping to that, I'm just gonna go show you a sample here. So is this exactly the one that we've seen here? Let's compare, or at least in some similar terms. Here, if you go to details, this is exactly what you see. Go to XML view or go to friendly view. This is exactly what you'll be seeing. Similar to the one that we've seen here. Now we'll jump into the details here, but that's fine. So let me just minimize this for a bit. And then you see all these logs are 4624 logs, right? And you see the timings. Now you see, this is amazing. Like, we are able to see this in one system. Now imagine if you're an admin, or imagine you are a security administrator of a very big company. Let's take a company to be Amazon. Now, Amazon has how many computers, roughly a number of laptops or the corporate device it's on. So the latency time that you see here, this is for one system, right? Imagine the security administrator has thousands of computers that he has to search through or comb through these filters and check for what exactly the time and what log is happening, right? That exercise is pretty cumbersome. So all this work is actually taken up by the tools which we call as SIEM. So the answer to the question, is there a predecessor? In my opinion, yes, the predecessor is EventViewer. And is EventViewer good? I would say it's an amazing tool. It comes natively with Windows, but it's actually good for when you have like one local system and when you have some pretty good time to actually go through all the events. And this UI is also pretty difficult, for at least for the first timers. You get pretty overwhelmed with the number of logs and stuff like that. So for exactly this purpose, we have what is called a SIEM. So we are done with the first one, second one, and okay, right. Next, let's jump into Splunk Enterprise. So Splunk is one of the solutions available in market. Obviously, there are several other solutions. One of the most notable solution, the alternative to this one, is called FortiSIEM, which is owned by Fortinet. But for the purpose of this demonstration, we'll be restricted to Splunk Enterprise. So the way to download it, brief introduction, like we'll talk more about Splunk when we keep downloading the software. So because it takes some time. So we go to Google and then you just type Splunk Enterprise or Splunk download. You go to this link which says download Splunk Enterprise for free. Oh, by the way, it's free. All you have to do is you need to create an account here with Splunk. In this case, I already have something. So here it gives you a pretty good description, and the current version that we use, the updated version, is 8.1.2. If you're using an old version of Splunk, by all means, I would advise you to update it since it has pretty good features. We'll be talking about more in details. So if you're doing this for the first time, you basically fill out all these details and you can download. And by this, you actually create a Splunk account, which you'll be using further. But in this case, I do already have a thing that I have. So let me go there. No. And here you have three different variations. If you're using a Windows, you would select this one. If you use Linux, then you have multiple options. You could download a Debian version and then do a command line install. And then if you have a Mac, obviously by all means you would select a Mac here. In this case, let's download it. And like I said, since this is free, there's also some conditions that Splunk has, and we're just gonna talk about those. Let's go back. So these are the ones that they gave you for free. So basically, you get something called as 500 MB of data per day is actually free. Like that's the licensing limits. So indexing, the way we understand indexing is like, since now we just spoke about it, right? Like your computer might generate millions or even like millions lines of logs, but indexing is the total amount of data a SIM tool can ingest. In this case, it's going to be Splunk. So basically, what this is saying is Splunk every day can ingest up to 500 MB of your data. So now, obviously, the questions are: what if I exceed? I'm not exactly sure because I think I've exceeded once or twice and nothing has happened. But I've read it somewhere on Reddit that if you actually exceed, or three, if you have three strikes on your profile, you will not have an option to search your logs or something like that. You can obviously get more details on Reddit or in their platform. The platform is, they're actually a pretty good community out there, so it's good, you can talk to people. And yeah, and it's actually free for 60 days, and then you can purchase a Splunk enterprise license, or you get something called as free license. So what happens in this free license is, I think the indexing remains same, but you might not get all the features. But I brought, like I would say, 60 days is more than enough for you to learn and then get a certification if that's what you're working towards. Now we'll just give it some time. I'm not sure why is it so slow. So just says 2 minutes. We'll come back once the installation is done. All right. So coming back. So now we've downloaded Splunk, but before that, I get a lot of questions. So Splunk usually comes in the context, or people use Splunk in mostly in the concept of security domains. But the question is Splunk being used elsewhere, or is Splunk only suited, or the SIM that we'll be talking about? Since it also has event management, can it just process all the data that we can get? The answer is absolutely yes. And this link actually tells you and even gives you use cases of how each and every customer of the Splunk uses their product in their own unique way. And according to the Splunk website, it's trusted by 91 of the Fortune 100 companies. So that's actually a pretty high ratio of customers that they have, and also the market share. Now, since the download is already done, let's try opening it up. To check this box, you obviously naturally have to go read through the license. But since I've already done that, I'm okay with it. So I go and check this box. And then we don't do any customizing of options. And I don't recommend doing any of these until you're familiar with the product. And then this is the first time that we need to use like a username and password. This is mostly in line with whatever any software that you install, or for example the SQL servers that you install, you need to specify an admin initial username and password, right? This is exactly the way it is. I would be giving my Splunk details just so I remembered this. And then we do next, and then create start menu, sure, by all means. And then it starts to install. So we see the installation is in progress. And one other question that I get is, so imagine if I have Splunk solution. So would it just be reading the logs from this computer? No, naturally it would be reading the logs from anywhere as long as you configure it. So you need to use something called as universal forwarders to actually forward your events from whatever your local system to the central Splunk server. Oh, and by the way, the one that we're doing is actually a Splunk on-prem instance. So Splunk supports in this age two different variations. You can either have Splunk on your system or basically in your premises, that's called on-prem, or the second option is to go through Splunk Cloud, is where it's so Splunk Cloud is more or less an SaaS solution, which is software as a solution service. So it removes all the hassles of upgrading the softwares and then updating the patches and keeping your system up to date with the latest versions. While so that's definitely a pro, but there's obviously cons that you need to remember of a Splunk Cloud. So like it's not as friendly as the Splunk on-prem. For example, for on-prem, you have access to the backend as well. You can change the knowledge objects or configuration items on the fly. But I remember this since we deal with Splunk Cloud for a brief amount of time, and any new app that you have to install on Splunk Cloud, you cannot do it manually, and all those have to be routed through Splunk support, which is definitely not bad. But I am personally not comfortable with the time around. Excuse me. So naturally opt for Splunk on-prem, but this definitely depends on how you want to do it. While the functionality and the performance is exactly the same, or another way I would say the Splunk performance of on cloud would rather be much better because clouds are definitely scalable and have higher performance limits.
Within the installation.
So our Splunk is finally installed, and then we get an option. So our Splunk is now finally installed, and then gives an option to launch it with the browser. So by default, this is something that we have to know. Splunk by default uses the port. So Splunk is mostly a web UI application, and then it runs in a browser, and then it runs on a port called 8000. Obviously, this port number is customizable, and but we'll not be talking about that today. So let's do finish, and it should open the home screen for us. So this should run on ideally on localhost port 8000. Um, I think it's probably gonna load, but let's try to run it manually. Oh, this is where it is. I'm not sure why it did not open, but naturally it should open automatically. So this is something that you have to remember. It by default comes into port 8000. And if you see, it gives you certain options. It says if you install for the first time, it's naturally admin and the password you created. And remember, this is the password that we've created during the installation time and not the Splunk login. I mean, it really depends if you keep the both passwords, but this particular case is the ID and the credentials that we've created using the software installation steps. So if you remember, I gave the same thing as my Splunk here, and then let me input my username and then my password and then sign in. So this is exactly the homepage that you'll be seeing for the very first time, and it's a couple of options, and Splunk help is actually pretty good, but for now we'll not be using it. So if you're actually new for the first time, I would definitely recommend you going through the product tours. There's actually pretty good documentation there. So without jumping much, let's jump into the basic application that most everybody will be using us on daily basis. It's called Splunk Search and Reporting, and then we'll talk about all the basic things that we see on this screen here. First time, I'm going to skip it for now. So this is the home page for Splunk that you'll be seeing it whenever you log in from the next time, and we'll definitely jump into each and every part. But before that, let's touch base the most important things. Let's actually check all the options that we have. So this indicator here is actually will actually tell you if there's any issues. I think when you have some critical issues, this thing turns into red, I assume. And yeah, this is basically telling you all the health, and it's like giving you one-stop solution to all the errors you might have. And since we are the administrator, and by default you'll be given an admin role, so here is where you manage your account settings and then preferences. If you have any preferences, actually talk about setting your own time zone in this case, and the default application where you or your users might be logging in whenever they log into the application. So it's default set to home, and the one that you see in the back end is actually search and reporting. Well, this is definitely my preference, but I'm going to keep it here. And then we should not let's not touch the restart background jobs. I mean, we'll come back to this later. So one important thing that you have to know about Splunk is, by default, Splunk runs at boot time, which basically means whenever your computer restarts, or if you have to restart a Windows VM, Splunk starts automatically. And mind it, this is only for Windows, and it's not the case with Linux. So if by case you are using a Linux, you need to add that configuration manually. This, I assume, this is a pretty good documentation, which I'm going to leave it in my blog and detailed inscriptions on my blog. And then we apply these changes. Here you see something called SPL, right? So SPL, this is another keyword that we need to remember. SPL is like the brains of Splunk, and all the processing languages out there, and Splunk uses its own language, or the way we search Splunk is called SPL, which stands for Search Processing Language. Then we apply these changes. So this is our preferences, and then if you have any errors or issues or any configuration issues, they show up here in messages. And settings is the most important thing here. Is this is more of a one-stop solution to do a lot of things. So this is exactly where we configure all the Splunk configurations, knowledge objects. If you want to do user interface, if you want to define tags, data models, create search reports, or if you talk about data, this is where we add our data. It's either this one or this one here. And then here is where you see the instrumentation and licensing. For example, if you remember, the Splunk free edition comes with 500 MB of free storage, right? There's one way to monitor. Whenever you exceed the license, what happens is you get a notification here, or you can also monitor this using the licensing. There's actually a pretty good dashboard which I'm going to show. So let's open in a new tab. So now this should tell us the total amount of license that we're using. Here, for example, it gives you the daily volume is 500 MB. And since we just installed and we don't have any data incoming, so the volume is basically zero here. And if you click on usage report, here's where it shows your need dashboard of how much you totally used and also in the last 30 days. So by the way, another keyword that I've been using is this is called dashboard. Dashboard. So what's a dashboard? Dashboard is more or less a one-stop visualization that you can configure using Splunk and using the search languages. Basically, all these things will have a search running in the background. If you, I mean, we can come about it later, but ideally, all you see is diagrams here, right? But in the backend, what's happening is this is actually running a search. And how do I know it's running a search? Or if you want to see a search, is when you hover on something, you can actually find these four options here. I mean, we'll come back. So these are the same options when you have, once you run any search. So the first thing is open in search. Second thing is you can export this or any inspected, or just refresh it. Now, since you guys just wanted to see the search here, just click on this. It's going to open it. And then it's going to open a whole search of whatever it was running to give this particular values. And will basically digest each and every part of this. I know this is a very big query, but we can digest it later. But without jumping here, now let's go back to the home screen. So this was one important page that we've had. An activity is basically talking about all the jobs that are running in the background. So like I said, there's basically three different stages in the Splunk home screen. This is all talking about the configurations part, right? And here, if you see, there's something called apps. So apps are just anything like basically, I'm pretty sure. Let's take an example. You have your phone, right? So your phone is a bare OS, which is basically like the operating system. Similar ways, the one that we have is just a Splunk, and this is actually amazing. You can do all the work here, but depending on your application, there might be some free softwares or apps that are already available in the market. And what exactly are they? We're gonna, and it's similar to adding like an app to your OS, right? Or basically think of this like this. Let's take an example of Facebook. Now, Facebook by default is a very big application and very good application. You can do everything in Facebook, but depending on your application, there might be some apps available in that specific market which suit your need, right? Similar way, we're not going to go into detail again. And then since this is the basic installation, we don't have any apps. But if you want to take a look at the apps, just click on manage apps or find more apps. This is going to go to the Splunk store, and then Yeah, these are all the apps available, and then it's you can just install. If you remember, this was what I was telling you, the difference between the on-prem instance and the cloud instance. For some particular apps, I'm not sure about all of them. For example, if your application is security, I know of an app called Infosec. Let's take a look at Infosec. That's a pretty good app, actually. Now, this app is something that you can install on the fly if you're using an on-prem instance. But like I said, if you chose an instance of Splunk Cloud, you most probably have to request it through Splunk support, which might take some amount of time. So now this was apps, and this table is all the things that, or basically is the collection objects, right? For example, the first tab is search is, and if you see here, this is where you search things. And datasets is a collection of all your datasets that you've uploaded to this. And here, if you see, by default, Splunk actually gives you a couple of sample data as well. But we won't be using any of this. But this is definitely one good place to explore if you don't have your data. And then this is just talking about reports, collection of reports, and this is collection of alerts that we might have, and this is the collection of dashboards. Okay, very good. Right. Okay. So now let's go back to search, which is the basic thing. But before that, let's talk about Splunk roles and permissions, right? Naturally, I would imagine if you're using Splunk by yourself, you most probably need not be have like there wouldn't be a need for you to create a different user, right? But imagine if you're using a Splunk instance for an enterprise, then you cannot manage everything by a single person. Then you might have to delegate some tasks. That's when you go to settings, and then you go to users on the right here. Here is where you see all the list of users. Like I said, since the first user account that we created during installation will have admin privileges, and then there's pretty good options that you can actually edit the user roles. But the way of creating a user is actually pretty easy. For example, just click on new user, give them a name. For in this case, we'll give them test, and then we'll give them a name, test user, and then let's give them a thing. Let's say abc at def.com, and then let's set a password. Let's give them and then confirm the password here. It says there should be 8 characters, so okay, that's done. So this thing is done. You can set their default time zone, and this is a very important thing. Like similar to any other application that you use, the level of access or the level of access depends on how much a person should be able to access or the amount of work they should be doing, right? And Splunk by default has a couple of things that they've already defined, and by all means, this is definitely customizable, which means that you can customize the roles and create like what do you say, the anon. This is basically similar to the security groups that you can define in cloud, right? So similar way, you can create your own Splunk user roles and their responsibilities. And these are all the basic all the response roles that Splunk provides by default. And there's actually pretty good documentation about what is what, about what Splunk defines. And just to give you a sum up, so admin is somebody is basically the administrator, and it has the most capabilities assigned to it. And then can delete is a profile. Now, okay, can delete is actually an interesting thing here. When you're talking about security, obviously not all people should have access to delete the logs, right? Since Splunk or SIEM is talking about the ingestion of logs, you don't want the logs to be deleted just like that, right? So this is a very important access, and you have to exercise caution before assigning this to any user. And then you have power user. So power user is kind of what you can say is more one step more than what you have for a user. So user profile is the basic profile that you can give them. So this user can create, edit their own search or run searches. But whereas power user can do all that whatever the user can do and also edit all different shared objects. So that's the difference here. And then I'm going to obviously leave a link to the Splunk documentation. We can talk about that here. So for this case, I'm going to give the power user to the the new user that we've been creating. Require password change on first login, obviously no, and we'll save it. So here is where you, okay, thank you Google Chrome. Here is where again you can edit all the things that you have, view capabilities, you can clone their things and create new users and stuff like that. We won't be wasting much time there. Now, like I said, this was a brief introduction to Splunk, and the next thing that we have is adding local data and visualizing through Splunk. All right, great. Now that we know the basic thing, uh, like I said, we first jump back to Splunk search, which is going to be the home screen for the one that we've been using most of the time. And like I said, it says enter search here. This is where you enter your search queries, and search queries have to be written in the language that we spoke about. It's called SPL language, which Splunk supports. It's pretty easy. So two key things that you have to remember here is, first thing is you can search here in this thing that's prompting you for to write something, and the second thing is you have to select the time. Obviously logs are as good as the time you search it, right? For example, if you want to, like, let's go back to the use case that we've been talking about. If you want to search for who logged into my system, I need to specify a time, right? If not, so there's actually pretty good options here, like pretty massive list of options. Basically you can search for the last 15 minutes, 60 minutes, or all time, or Splunk can also do a real-time search. And couple more options here, date time, relative, which won't be using much in this current video. So one thing to remember, Splunk by default has the option of, like, it's defaulted to search for last 24 hours, which you can obviously change. And then this part here is talking about search history, is basically the history of all the searches that you did. Since we don't have anything here, you will not see anything. And then the max retention for the Splunk search history is only 30 days. So you have to keep that in mind. And here one important thing is data summary will actually give you a summary of all the data ingestion. Since in this case we have not added any data, we won't be seeing any of this data. We'll come back to this one once we add some data. Now the important question, where do we add the data? Like, now going back to this one, we've seen that our device definitely has data and is generating data. Now let's try to get the same data into Splunk and start visualizing it and see how user friendly it is, right? So the way to do is go to settings here and then go to add data. So in this case we'll be adding two data sets. The first one is actually monitoring all the authentication or with the Windows security logs, as well as let's take a look into seeing the network activity as well, right? So you have a couple more options here. You can we can basically we'll be configuring one or each in the subsequent videos that we'll be talking about. But for this demonstration, we'll be restricted to use to the Microsoft or basically the Windows security logs. So let's take a look into what this one offers, like the OS level things. It says Windows event logs. This is what we can click. And then if you want to monitor Windows event logs on remote servers, this is the way to go. But we wouldn't be doing that. So exit, yes. And then go to security. And this is basically direct integrations to all the endpoint solutions out there in the market. So you could use this one. And in networking, you can this is basically direct connections to Palo Alto networks and well as Cisco networks. Or you could also upload your data. So this is where, imagine if your activity is to basically visualize a data set, like a big data set, right? This is also the way to go. And by the way, Splunk can also monitor the traffic, whether it could be HTTP, WMI, or TCP, UDP scripts. We'll be using one of this. So no issues there. And then go back to settings, data inputs. Okay, you see when you go to data inputs, this is where you see all the data inputs that we can give to the system. Uh, the list is, you have actually a pretty good amount of lists. And then forwarded inputs are all the inputs that are coming from the external. Like I said, Splunk can obviously send or accept data from any other remote system. So this is basically looking at all the forward events, or basically the events coming from the remote system. So we'll be taking the list at the first one here. And then the first one says local event log collection. Sure, let's take a look into see what we have. Very good. Here you see there are different type of all the logs and which are already segregated. So very good here. So the one that we, if you remember, sorry, we wanted Windows security logs. So just click on security and then security ones are selected. So one of, and naturally if you want more if you want more logs, you can select application or setup or system depending on what are the types of things that you need. For example, these are the ones here. You can select anything that you want here, but for this demonstration we're only doing security logs. So one thing is it says set the destination index for the source. So what exactly is an index? And by default, if you see, it has 4 different index. So the way, like, Splunk indexes the data, right? Basically Splunk digests the data whatever you give it. So these are all placed in some buckets, and the buckets that we call, or basic, or the analogous to this one is, if you're talking about SQL servers, these are the tables. And so basically Splunk is asking you about where do I store this data, and by default it can either put it in default index, or you could just give your own index if you wish. But for this purpose we'll be using it to go to the main index, which is the natural main first, the default index. Okay. All right, so this was what we just configured, and here it shows you all the data sources you're actually getting the events from. The event collection name was localhost, and the type of logs you're getting is security, and the host name is the localhost, and the index is main. Now let's take a look and see if we are actually getting the data. Now this was as simple as that. Yes, you successfully added an input. So one way to search just to verify you have the data is actually searching, or you could also go to data summary. But for this case, let's actually go and search the data. If you remember, the index that we gave for this particular log collection was main. So I'm just going to do index is equal to main in this case. And then I'm not going to search for the last 24 hours, but rather I'm going to do last 15 minutes. And then I click enter. You see in the last 15 minutes, it's already has the data, and it's already giving me the data. Like, this was exactly all the data that you had in security in the last 15 minutes. You see how easy is it to search here? All it just did was give the bucket name. In the last 15 minutes, it just gives me the log, right? And here naturally I can do to whatever time I want, and depending on my application. If you're trying to track a malware and see all the anomalous logins, it really depends on your application, and you can search for anything here. So one interesting thing is Splunk by default does a time chart for you. Basically, this, whatever time you give it, plots a map and then gives you all the events, and gives you an indication of what time all these events occur, right? So like I said, our basic use case for this case was to find out all the logs, all the authentications or the successful authentications happening to this particular laptop, right? And which we've determined the event code was something called as 4624, right? So let's take a look. So there's two ways to do it. For the first time beginners, so these are called keywords. Now, how do you know if something is called event ID or event code? You don't know that naturally, right? So one way to do that is use wildcards. As in SQL Server, the wildcard in Splunk is called asterisk. So just do asterisk 4624 and then asterisk and then do enter. Here it's going to search for anything that contains 4624. Here you see it basically tells us there are 6 events in the last 15 minutes. Very good. Or the second way, like obviously so the way Splunk works is mostly in key value, in the terms of key value pairs. So just search for the key field that you wanted to have. In this particular case, since I already know, it's called event code on Splunk. So I'm just going to do this event code. In this case, since I know it here, I'm just going to do event code is equal to 4624. Let's search for the last 15 minutes. I should ideally get the same number of events. So now you see, right? It's as simple as searching this set of events, rather than going the traditional way. And you saw how cumbersome this was. Now let me show you an example of using wildcard. For example, I know that something starts with 4, but I exactly don't know what exactly is it, right? So that time I could do it starts with 4, and then I put a star here and then do enter. Here you see it's basically saying it's giving me all the logs which start with 4 and then can end with anything, right? Basically it's a while marker. Let's see what all does it have. So let's search for the thing called event code. So it says we have 4798, 4624, and 4672 events. And by the way, mind it, all these logs that you see are exactly what you see on your local host. And you can, to select something, you can also click on, for example, here, I want to see 4624 only. So I click on this and then you see the logs. I'm just going to expand for the, just to be sure, just to show you guys the way it works. So here you see, and here you see in details, this is exactly the same amount of detail and the same details that you see here and there. It should exactly have all the details, just like this. Where is this? It's here. Okay. Here you see all the details are exactly here. So this was one way of doing it. Now, like I said, I'm just going to add one other data set. Let's also add our internet logs, or basically the network logs, right? So now you know how to do it. Go to settings and then go to data index, data inputs, and then scroll down and you say something called as HTTP event collector. I assume this is the one. Let's click on it. So the way we do is go to settings and then go to data inputs, and then scroll down all the way to something that says local Windows network monitoring, and then you click on this. It says there's no configuration. Naturally, since this is a new instance that we created, click on new Splunk network monitoring. Great. And here, let's give it a network monitor name. For this instance, let me just call it netmon for this purposes. And these are all the options that it's giving us by default. So it's basically asking us, do you want to collect anything, all IPv4 and v6? Yes, obviously. And the packet types, do you want to have connect, accept, and transport? I would need transport as well. And then directions, I want yes, inbound and outbound, and protocols, I need both the protocols. And it's asking us if you want to filter on any user, for example, any remote address that you want, or any process or user. Since in this case we want a blanket, we want all the logs, we won't be selecting any of these, then just click on next. The app context is basically telling you what's the primary purpose. So this also sets the permissions. This is basically asking us where do you would like to use these logs. uh, like if you remember, the initial thing where we search is called search and reporting, so we leave it by default. And the host, this host is basically, now imagine, like we said, if you're using an enterprise level, each and every laptop or the device will have a unique name, right? Which is what appears here, just to differentiate the logs are coming from this particular system or not, right? And the index, like we said, you can either select one of the indexes or you can create a new index. Now, just for to show you purposes, I'm just going to create a new index here. We're not gonna talk about a lot of things here, but let's just give an index name. Let's call this, since this is network monitoring, let's give them the index called netmon, and then leave everything as is by default, and then just to save. So it immediately changes to netmon. Very good. And then we review it, and then just review all the things, and if you have any changes to make, just go back and change. Since we don't have anything, we'll just submit. And then it says we've successfully created it. The first thing it says is start searching. Well, let's get into it and see if you're actually getting the logs or not. All right, here you see. So I'm not gonna take, let's start with the beginning. I'm not gonna do all time here. So I'm just gonna click on search, start a new search here. So the earlier step, so when you do start searching, it's just gonna give you, it's more of a troubleshooting, right? To see if the logs are actually coming or not. Now, since we know the concept, we're just gonna do index is equal to the name of the index that we gave. In this case, it was netmon. and then we're just going to search in the last 24 hours. Great. And then do an enter. There you go. In the last 24 hours, it says we have 11,223 events, and it says most of the events occurred from 7 p.m. or basically that is when it start capturing the data, right? That's the reason that you have. So netmon is not equivalent to the Windows logs, because netmon is something, it's more of a capturing device, right? So basically this is saying it started monitoring from 7 p.m. onwards. That's why you see logs only from 7 p.m. And there's multiple options here. If you see, it's each and every packet is actually giving me a lot of inputs, uh, right from the remote name, from the IP address, to the protocol that it's using, to the program that it's been using. For example, this one was, so I use a software called remote mouse. So it's basically telling this software was actually sending some data, and yeah, it's actually inbound traffic coming from this particular address to this particular address. Well, that's great. So just like this, you can now basically add all the inputs that you need and then keep searching. That's the way to go. And now before ending, just going back to the things that we've discussed before, but just see what difference it made after adding the data, right? So in this case, the, the first thing to take a look is called search history. It should show us all the histories, searches that we've done in the last whatever time. Here, since we don't have time filter, it's just going to give us all of them. It's as simple as if you like a particular search and you want to rerun it, just to add to search, it's going to add it right here and then set the amount of time you need, and then it's good to go. This was one of the thing. And the second thing that I wanted to show you guys was the data summary after adding the data. This is more or less a single snippet showing you about all the types. Here you see it's basically saying this particular host is giving me a total log count of 32,087 logs. And if you talk about sources, it says the Windows security events are 32,087 logs. So that's the thing. I hope you've learned some interesting insights about the app and the way to install it, and then a basic introduction to Splunk. So I really hope you guys like the video, and we'll obviously be talking about things in much detail about creating searches and then adding more data inputs and creating dashboards. So definitely stay tuned, and by all means, if you like the channel, please do give it a like, share, and subscribe. Thank you guys, and stay safe. Have a great day. Bye bye.